My name is Alan Mackinnon. I attended the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference in the first week in May as a delegate from Scottish CND. This is my report, and I hope you find it interesting. The Non-Proliferation Treaty is described as a deal between the 5 original nuclear weapon states, that's Britain, America, Russia, France and China, and the great majority of non-nuclear states. The deal is that the non-nuclear states agree not to seek nuclear weapons, and in return for that, the nuclear weapon states agree to negotiate their weapons away and bring their weapons down to zero. Generally speaking, the non-nuclear states have kept their side of the bargain, while the nuclear weapon states have not. This is part of the demonstration that took place the day before the conference opened. 15,000 people marched through the streets of New York to demand a world free from weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons. This is a section of the demonstration covered by Mayors for Peace, which is the fastest growing peace organisation in the world, now encompassing over 4,000 towns and cities across the world, with covering more than half the world's population. And this is a section of the British CND delegation that attended that conference. Now, the big idea that's emerged over the past 10 years or so is the idea of a nuclear weapons convention. That's a negotiated, phased and balanced reduction in nuclear weapons leading to zero nuclear weapons by any country. So it's leading to a global ban on nuclear weapons. Opinion polls across the world show huge support for such a treaty, including in the United States and Britain. And in the past few years or so, we've seen support from a whole number of establishment figures, major political figures from the past and present, who have come out in support of such a treaty. And similar demands have come from a number of campaigning organisations, ICANN, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, Mayors for Peace that we mentioned earlier, the launch of Global Zero, and new proposals from the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, his 5 steps to a nuclear-free world. Now, a nuclear weapons convention is, however, opposed by several countries, including Britain, America, France and Russia. The UK ambassador, John Duncan, argues that this is an idea that's premature, that it's idealistic, that it's unrealistic. He argues that it's in conflict with the Non-Proliferation Treaty in some bizarre logic, and he prefers a step-by-step approach, such as the New START agreement between the United States and Russia to reduce their nuclear weapons on both sides. It's fairly easy, I think, to counter these arguments, because a nuclear weapons convention is not in conflict with the Non-Proliferation Treaty. It actually complements it. Indeed, it provides the framework for implementing the crucial Article 6, which deals with nuclear disarmament. It also provides a comprehensive framework which draws in all nuclear weapon states, not simply the original 5, but also the 4 that are outside the treaty: Pakistan, India, North Korea and Israel. We don't need to be dogmatic about the form that this takes. It could follow the form of the original model Nuclear Weapons Convention, or it could follow the form of Ban Ki-moon's 5 steps to a nuclear-free world. The important thing is that a comprehensive framework is agreed, and that we begin to start that process. And of course, it doesn't conflict with a step-by-step approach, because individual steps are, of course, welcome as part of that process. It's just that if it's only a step-by-step approach, then you lose sight of the longer-term objective of a nuclear-free world. You can easily get blown off course. Progress could be arrested by, for example, a change in the US presidency. So what are the main decisions then of the 2010 review conference? The most important and positive thing, I think, was the support for the idea of a nuclear-free Middle East, or to put it more accurately, a Middle East free from weapons of mass destruction. Part of that would include the call for Israel to come clean about its nuclear weapons, to join the NPT and to accept the safeguards of the International Atomic Energy Authority, which other nuclear countries have to do. Towards that process, the UN Secretary General would have the responsibility of convening a conference in 2012 to negotiate such a treaty with all the Middle Eastern states invited. I think this is a very important step forward because it deals not only with the problem, particularly as some countries see it, of Iran's nuclear program, where there's some dubiety about whether it's purely for civilian or energy needs, or whether it's ultimately intended to produce nuclear weapons. And of course Israel, which is the only country in the Middle East which actually does have nuclear weapons. So it clearly is a way of dealing with both of these problems, and in that sense is long overdue. There also is, I think, a precedent, because we already have nuclear-free zones in Africa, in Latin America, Central Asia, Southeast Asia and the South Pacific, and Antarctica. And so it's a logical extension to now attempt to do the same thing in the Middle East, which of course is such a powder keg. What about the central issue of nuclear disarmament? Unfortunately, the big idea of a nuclear weapons convention was not accepted by the nuclear weapon states, hardly surprising, but there were still some positive achievements. The nuclear weapon states agreed to accelerate concrete progress towards nuclear disarmament. They also agreed to downgrade the role of nuclear weapons in their military doctrines. The United States has already begun to do that, and to report back progress on these matters in 4 years' time. So these are positive things which I think the peace movement can use to insist that we get further progress on these matters. The idea of a nuclear weapons convention, as enshrined in the in Ban Ki-moon's 5 steps to a nuclear-free world, was noted by the conference, but there were no binding commitments to carry it out. So what are the implications for campaigning at home and abroad? Firstly, the fact that the Nuclear Weapons Convention is now on the agenda. It has widespread international support. It's now seen as necessary and achievable. And our job in Scotland and across the rest of Britain is to popularise the idea and to build popular support, particularly among elected representatives like MPs, MSPs and councils. We need to ensure implementation of the limited decisions that were taken by the review conference. So we need to put pressure on Israel and the United States to make sure that the conference on the Middle East nuclear-free zone actually takes place and that Israel actually attends. Thirdly, that Trident replacement is inconsistent with the decisions taken by the review conference. The government has signed up, remember, to accelerating concrete progress towards nuclear disarmament. Well, Trident replacement takes us in exactly the opposite direction. It would bind us into possession of nuclear weapons for the next 50 years. So Britain is increasingly out of step, not only with the Obama administration, but with the rest of the world. We need to insist that the British government honours its international obligations. We need to exploit the ambiguity in the government coalition agreement, which involves scrutinising to ensure value, scrutinising Trident replacement to ensure value, and that the Liberal Democrats can still make the case for alternatives to Trident. Well, we know that the costs of Trident have virtually doubled since its original estimates, and that in itself should give us good reason to question and challenge the programme and to argue that the best alternative is to scrap the system altogether. Trident, of course, involves spending billions on a weapon of mass destruction, and that money will come directly at the expense of spending on education, health and local authority services, at a time when these services themselves will be under attack, perhaps facing cuts of up to 20%. So I think we need to develop our work with teachers, with health workers, with public service unions, so that we get a joint campaign against the cuts, and to argue that we need to spend the money meeting social need, not on new weapons of mass destruction. So what can you do to help this process? You can join Scottish CND. You can join our contacts list if you're not quite ready to join the organisation. You can log on to our website at banthebomb.org or the British CND website at cnduk.org so that we can keep in touch with you and you can keep in touch with us, and together we can make this world a better and safer place. Thanks for listening.